Part 42. Sign in at the end of the world, start by devouring the flame demon lord. Author, Mo. Chapter 411. In the deep forest, there were continuous screams of some ferocious beasts. With a loud thump, a huge wild boar fell to the ground. Its huge body crushed the trees beside it and created a huge deep pit on the ground. What was even more bizarre was that a big hole was opened in the wild boar's abdomen. The blood in its body seemed to be drained out, and even its flesh and blood were slowly moving in one direction. Countless blood essences turned into bloodlines in the air, all returning to a figure in front. The huge body of the giant wild boar also became shriveled and skinny in an instant, and turned into a dried corpse in an instant. Not far ahead, a blood-red figure was walking slowly in the dense forest. This figure walked slowly, dragging a bloodline under his feet, and dried corpses were lying on the ground wherever he passed. A purple box was vaguely seen floating in front of him, holding a blood-red strange long knife in his hand. Drops of blood slid down the blade of the flashing blood. What's even more terrifying is that this blood-stained figure had a fist-sized blood hole pierced through his chest. And as countless blood and flesh energy were swallowed and gathered, the blood-colored hole in his chest healed rapidly at a speed visible to the naked eye. The wound caused by Deyuan is really not so easy to heal. Mu murmured, and the demon sword in his hand was already trembling with excitement under the stimulation of the surrounding blood. These are not for you to eat. If you don't obey, I will swallow you too. He looked down at the demon sword, and the latter immediately stopped moving obediently. The Yama demon sword devours souls and blood, and has already given birth to a weak spiritual intelligence under the nourishment of soul essence and blood for many days. Walking in the quiet jungle, the surrounding beasts seemed to have been killed and swallowed by Mu, and there was no trace of life. Suddenly, Mu's eyes moved slightly, as if he had sensed something, and a strange color flashed in his eyes. He turned his footsteps and walked in a certain direction. Passing through the lush trees, the scene in front of him was suffocating. Under a towering tree deep in the forest, spider webs were densely covered. A huge spider body was hanging above the spider web, and countless beast corpses were hanging below. What surprised Mu the most was that there was a terrified human man hanging right below the white spider web. The human man was in tattered clothes, with a panicked look on his face. Half of his face was eaten alive, and he cried out very faintly. The faint cry for help that Mu just heard came from here. But he didn't understand why there would be a human figure in the depths of this remote and dangerous forest. The miserable man whose body was stuck on the spider web had half of his head eaten by a giant spider, revealing a white skull and disgusting brains. But even so, as an awakened person with strong physical strength, he still did not die, but he could clearly feel the loss of vitality in his body. He was numb to the pain and could only subconsciously let out a weak cry until a red figure appeared in the depths of the jungle in the distance. It was a strange face with blood all over his body, holding a red demon sword, with a calm expression. The giant spider above his head immediately moved after seeing the blood-stained man. The narrow limbs moved repeatedly on the spider web, and in a flash, they rushed towards the blood-stained man. However, the next moment, the man in red suddenly swung the blood-red long knife in his hand. The sharp blade flashed a cold blood light in the air, and in a flash, the giant spider was chopped in half. A large amount of blood spurted out, and the giant spider fell to the ground with its body divided into two parts, and it became shriveled and skinny in an instant. At the same time, the man in red also walked towards the giant tree where the spider web was hanging. At this moment, the miserable man whose head was half-eaten had a glimmer of hope in his eyes. That red-dressed figure was simply the dawn of hope in his despair. Help, help. He used all his strength to open his cracked mouth, but before he could finish, a pair of bloody hands had already pressed on his head. A strong suction force came from the top of his head, and the man's broken body was drained of blood and spirit in an instant, turning into a dry corpse. The light in the miserable man's eyes had not yet disappeared, and a wisp of soul had already flown away from his head. Mewtwo held the wisp of soul and directly activated the soul binding ability. In an instant, the man's broken and mottled memories had appeared in Mewtwo's mind. Selectively reading these film-like memories, mainly the man's origin and identity. After a while, a flash of understanding flashed in Mewtwo's eyes. In this wisp of soul fragment, Mewtwo found that the man came from a team of awakeners from a human base. What he didn't expect was that the reason why this group of people fell into this dark forest was actually related to himself. When he was fighting with the heterogeneous cult, these awakened ones were affected by the disaster and were directly annihilated by the aftermath of the battle. According to the man's memory, there were several companions who traveled through the space turbulence with him and finally came to this dense forest. However, due to the uncertainty of the space turbulence, he and his companions were scattered in various places in the dense forest. Originally, Mewtwo planned to find these awakeners and devour them one by one. After all, the energy in the awakeners' bodies was not comparable to these mutant creatures. But until he saw a familiar figure in the man's memory, an intriguing look appeared on his face. It's her. The familiar figure that Mewtwo saw was Fanyan, who had shared hardships with him in the God Realm world and was honored as Wind Spirit Sword Princess by all the players in the server. This world is really small. When he saw Fanyan using the jade pendant on her chest to open a gap in the space barrier in the man's memory, he couldn't help but be surprised. You know, that was the space barrier set up by a Daiyuan-level strongman. As early as in the God Realm world, he noticed the extraordinary nature of the jade pendant and even tried to use the demon sword to devour the jade pendant. But the breath emitted from the jade pendant even made the destructive level demon sword tremble. It seems that this Miss Sword Princess also has a big secret. Looking up at the deep forest in front of him, Mewtwo narrowed his eyes slightly, revealing a thoughtful look. The Iwan sect has all the masters in this scripture, and they will not give up until they kill him this time. Although the 12 sacrificial immortals are vicious, they will never easily show up in the world and expose their existence to the world. His strength has not yet recovered, so he might as well use this awakened team to do something. A surprising idea is about to come out of his mind, and Mewtwo's mouth corners slightly raised. I didn't expect that we will meet again so soon, Miss Sword Princess. Let's play a game. Sign in at the end of the world. Start by devouring the Flame Demon Lord. Author, MOCNU. Chapter 412. Several surviving awakeners, including Yefanyan, walked cautiously at the edge of the dense forest. But what they didn't expect was that a strange man covered in blood appeared in the deep forest in front of them. Looking at the figure that suddenly appeared not far away, several awakeners exchanged glances and saw the vigilance in each other's eyes. Only Yefanyan's eyes flashed with shock when he saw the face of the blood-colored figure, and the whole person was stunned on the spot. Is it him? Yefanyan's face began to become a little weird, and his eyes looked at the blood-stained figure in front of him with doubt. Before several people reacted, the man in front of them said in panic, "Run, the beasts in the forest are chasing us." Then, he fled to the other side of the dense forest. At the same time, a violent vibration came from the jungle ground behind the blood-stained man. The twin-tailed girl in the awakening team seemed to have suddenly sensed something and hurriedly reminded her companions to flee. The twin-tailed girl has a perceptual ability and is considered a scout in the team who predicts danger. Although they did not fully understand what happened, they subconsciously moved their feet and followed the direction of the blood-stained man. At this moment, they were exhausted and were no match for the beasts in the dense forest. After escaping for an unknown period of time, everyone's faces showed fatigue and their chests were also violently heaving. They were exhausted in the battle at Wangcheng Base, and they were fighting against the chaotic and dangerous space turbulence with all their strength. The excessive load had already exhausted them physically and mentally. Just when everyone was exhausted, the blood-stained figure in front also stopped. The man in the blood-stained clothes was also a little tired. He wiped the sweat from his head and breathed a sigh of relief. Finally got rid of them. Everyone felt that the shaking earth had returned to calm, and they couldn't help but breathe a sigh of relief. Several people looked at each other, and their eyes were still alert to the blood-stained man. There are too many dangers in the end times, especially in the outside world. Humans cannot relax their vigilance. Finally, the handsome Xiao Yunyi came out. As the leader of the awakened team, Xiao Yunyi still maintained a bit of grace and said, "We are the awakened team from Yongxiao City. I wonder who you are." The blood-stained man's eyes showed joy of meeting his kind, and then smiled bitterly. "After so many days, I finally met a human. My name is Chiu Mu, a scientific researcher from Zilan Base." Almost as soon as Mu Chiu finished speaking, the awakened people in front of him burst into surprise. Zilan Base, the high-tech base destroyed by the Eternal Night Dynasty. Including Xiao Yunyi, the faces of several awakened people all showed shock. A look of surprise flashed across Yefanyan's face. "It's him." The twin-tailed girl Jing Jing beside him had a gleam in her eyes when she heard the name Chiu Mu, but was suddenly covered by Yefanyan. Then, Mu Chiu vividly told everyone an inspirational story of a researcher surviving in the cracks. When the Zilan base was breached by the Eternal Night Army, many researchers ventured into the unfinished space gate. Traveling through the turbulence of time and space, he and several researchers came to this unknown dense forest. At first, they could hide in a cave and live a stable life. However, with the shortage of food and the attacks of many terrifying beasts, the surviving researchers died one after another, leaving only him to survive. "I don't know why these monsters hidden in the depths of the dense forest began to riot, and I barely escaped after running away for several times." Mu Chiu spread his hands, and the blood and scars all over his body seemed to tell the many dangers he had encountered. The expressions of several awakened people were different. Xiao Yunyi's eyes flashed with a gleam of brilliance, and he asked Mu Chiu some questions about the Zilan base in a veiled manner. But the blood-stained man in front of him, who claimed to be a scientific researcher, answered questions about the Zilan base fluently and knew everything about it. He could even tell some technological secrets that even outsiders like Xiao Yunyi had only heard of. Xiao Yunyi listened to Mu Chiu's story, and his expression gradually became excited from indifference. He already believed that the blood-stained man in front of him was a scientific researcher from that high-tech base. As we all know, the fuse of the Dawn War that shocked the human race was the destruction of the Zilan base. Since the destruction of the Zilan base, the leader Duan Muchen was killed by the Lord of the Eternal Night, and countless scientific researchers were missing. Even the high-tech equipment coveted by many bases was also annexed by the Eternal Night Dynasty. The Yongxiao city where Xiao Yunyi was located had also been eyeing the high-tech equipment of the Zilan base for a long time. If they can get the scientific research technology of those equipments, the strength of their entire base will rise to a higher level. And the blood-stained man in front of them is a scientific research expert from Zilan base. If he can be brought back to the base, then Xiao Yunyi's contribution will be much greater than exploring the ruins. Looking at the handsome young man in front of him, Xiao Yunyi's eyes became more and more scorching. He stepped forward and patted the blood-stained man on the shoulder, and said righteously, "Brother, you have worked so hard these days. As fellow human beings, we should help each other. Zilan base has been destroyed. Why don't you follow us back to the base and find another way to make a living?" And Mu Chiu, as Xiao Yunyi expected, gladly accepted the latter's invitation. Looking at the blood-stained man in front of him, Xiao Yunyi's eyes flashed with a gleam of brilliance. This unauthorized action not only caused dozens of high-level awakeners to lose their lives, but also put the survivors in danger. As the leader of the entire team, he has an unshirkable responsibility, and he will be severely punished even if he returns to the base. But if he brings back a scientific research expert from Zilan base, not only will the loss of the base be recovered, but he can also be credited with a great achievement. On the other side, Jing Jing, whose mouth was tightly covered by Yefanyan, seemed to recognize Mu Qiu, and her eyes sparkled. She was also a victim of the catastrophe in the divine domain, and she had a deep memory of the words Qiu Mu. Yefanyan looked at the familiar face of the blood-stained man in front of her with a puzzled look, her expression dazed. You are listening to novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. Sign in at the end of the world, start by devouring the flame demon lord. Author, MOCNU. Chapter 413. On the deep and quiet forest path, a few figures in shabby clothes walked cautiously. The roar of some ferocious beast could be heard faintly from the depths of the distant jungle, which was breathtaking. Tianlai Novel Network. The few surviving awakened people who passed through the turbulent flow of space had bright eyes, alert to the crisis that might come at any time. Mr. Qiu, you can rest assured that as long as we are here, we will definitely send you out of the mountains safely. A smile appeared on Xiao Yunyi's handsome face, then he looked at Mu Qiu and said. But before that, we have to confirm the life and death of other companions in the jungle. We came here together through the turbulence of space. We must not give up easily for our surviving companions. Xiao Yunyi's tone was solemn, and coupled with his upright face, he seemed to have a sense of righteousness and awe-inspiring righteousness. A faint smile appeared on Mu Qiu's face. It was obvious that Xiao Yunyi valued him very much and wanted to show off all his advantages. I saw a 7-person awakened team, with 3 people in front responsible for exploring the path, and 3 people behind them. And Mu Qiu, a precious scientific researcher from Zilan base, was naturally protected by everyone. This made Mu Qiu couldn't help but sigh that knowledge is power, which is universal no matter what era. After saying that, Xiao Yunyi stretched out his right hand holding the sword, and a ring on his fingertip emitted a faint light. He turned around and looked at the woman behind him, and said softly. Fanyan, please guard the rear. If anything happens, please contact me at any time. Yefanyan nodded absently, but glanced vaguely at the man in blood-clothed clothes beside him. Sure enough, when Xiao Yunyi said the word Sanskrit, a look of surprise first flashed in Mu Qiu's eyes, and then she looked at Yefanyan with doubtful eyes. After a moment, Mu Qiu shook her head imperceptibly and withdrew her scrutinizing gaze. Yefanyan, who paid close attention to this, finally breathed a sigh of relief. One hand unconsciously touched the scar that was gradually fading on his face, and he looked in a daze. Also, the face he used in the god's domain was the face of his previous life. Although his current appearance is subtly moving closer to his previous life, the hideous scar that has not yet been completely eliminated is still hanging on his face. How could ordinary people associate her, an ugly girl, with the wind spirit sword princess, who was unparalleled in the divine realm? Gently stroking the scars on his face, which faded a lot, even Yefanyan himself didn't notice the feeling of loss emerging from the bottom of his heart. Ahead, Xiao Yunyi and his orc companions were still chatting with Mu Qiu, the scientific research expert. As the steps approached somewhere in the jungle, the ring on Xiao Yunyi's fingertips shone brighter and brighter. This ring can sense the location of companions who also wear the ring. It helped us a lot when exploring the ruins. Xiao Yunyi looked at Mu Qiu and said with a smile. Speaking of which, I have to thank the Zilan base where Mr. Qiu is located for this. I heard that this set of rings was produced in the scientific research laboratory of the Zilan base. A kind smile appeared on his face, but an imperceptible glint flashed in Xiao Yunyi's eyes. Oh? Really? Mu Qiu seemed not to notice, narrowed her eyes, and smiled back. But I have never heard that the base has produced similar technological equipment. Maybe Xiao remembered it wrong. Xiao Yunyi smiled and said haha, and the doubts in his heart gradually disappeared. Along the way, it seemed that he and his companions were negotiating with Mu Qiu, but in fact they were taking the opportunity to inquire about the latter's details. Mu Chiu has an extremely deep understanding of all the affairs of the Zilan base, and knows everything about them. He was so meticulous that the batch and model of the equipment were all correct, as if he was really a scientific research expert in a high position. This made Xiao Yunyi even more convinced that he had found a treasure. How many advanced technologies should a senior scientific researcher at Zilan base have in his mind? Technological mechas, laser weapons, genetic agents, space technology. Just thinking of these, Xiao Yunyi couldn't help but feel hot in his heart, feeling that the team's death this time was simply an opportunity brought to him by God. However, at this moment, a strong wind blew up in the jungle behind everyone. Squeak! Several mutated wild monkeys with red eyes scurried out of the forest, opening their sharp claws to scratch at everyone. Let's go! Yefanyan gave a sweet shout to his companions, pulled out the slender sword from his waist, and tapped his toes. His body jumped up and down, and hurricane cyclones brewed around his body. Immediately afterwards, several invisible wind blades shot through the air, and the bodies of the mutated wild monkeys that sneaked up on them were cut into pieces in an instant, and they no longer lived. Mu Chiu's eyes flashed as she saw this scene. There is no doubt that Yefanyan is an awakener of the elemental system. Mu Chiu looked at Yefanyan's slender figure with interest, and his interest in the latter became more and more intense. The moment the corpse fell to the ground, more roars of wild beasts were heard from the depths of the jungle in the distance. Several people were immediately shocked and quickly accelerated their pace. During this period, we naturally encountered many mutant beasts in the jungle. But most of these mutant monsters located on the edge of the dense forest are mediocre in strength, and many of them are low-level monsters. Within a moment, they were all eliminated one by these elite awakeners. During the whole process, Mu Chiu was protected by several people in the middle. The former stroked his chin and had a general understanding of the strength of this team. Among the 7 people, except Mu Chiu, Xiao Yunyi, the leader of the team, had the highest strength, reaching the S level. The rest of the team included an awakened man who turned into an orc, a girl with twin ponytails named Jing Jing. There was also a woman holding a long whip and dressed seductively, and a young man wearing round frame glasses and looking unremarkable. These people have reached the A level without exception. Even if this team is placed in other human bases, it is enough to be called an elite team. As for Yefanyan, her breath was concealed by the mysterious jade pendant, and she only showed the strength of A level on the outside. But Mu Chiu had a feeling that her true strength was far from being as simple as A level. Following the guidance of the glowing ring on Xiao Yunyi's fingertips, everyone rushed all the way to the depths of the jungle. At the moment of arriving at a certain place in the jungle, the ring on Xiao Yunyi's fingertips shone brightly. After passing through the deep jungle, everyone saw the scene in front of them and couldn't help but tremble in shock and look horrified. Sign in at the end of the world. Start by devouring the Flame Demon Lord. Author, MOCNU. Chapter 414. This is. The few surviving awakened people's eyes widened, their pupils shrank suddenly, and they looked at the scene in front of them in disbelief, with horrified expressions. I saw countless shriveled corpses lying in the depths of the forest in front of me. The originally huge ferocious beasts were all turned into shriveled mummies at this moment, with a look of horror in their eyes. The ground covered with green plants is still stained with blood stains that have not yet dried up, as if the earth has been covered with a layer of blood. What happened here? Everyone stepped forward cautiously. The corpses of beasts were everywhere under their feet, but there was an inexplicable sense of oppression in the skinny outlines of the corpses. Finally, following the guidance of the ring, several people came to a charred corpse with no visible figure. Just from the wide open mouth, you can see how deep despair this corpse experienced during its lifetime. And where the light source of the ring is, it is this mummy whose face cannot be seen clearly. Xiao. The man wearing round glasses seemed to recognize the owner of the ring, threw himself next to the mummy, and immediately burst into tears. Xiao Yunyi and others began to carefully observe the other corpses on the ground. After some inspection, they came to a terrible conclusion. These ferocious beasts were at least B-level mutant monsters during their lifetimes, and some of them even had A-level powerful beings. The expression on Xiao Yunyi's face looked a little solemn. To be able to kill these many ferocious beasts without the ability to resist, the opponent must be at least an S-level terrifying ferocious beast. Although Xiao Yunyi is also S-level, his supernatural abilities are a bit useless in battles of the same level. Moreover, his physical energy has been exhausted in the previous battles, and he is no match for this mutated ferocious beast that grows in the jungle. Xiao Yunyi looked at his companions, who looked at each other in confusion. It was getting late, and after some discussion, everyone decided to find a relatively safe place nearby to rest for the night, and then set off to leave this secluded forest as soon as possible tomorrow morning. During this period, the team tried to find some nearby survivors who might have survived. But following the guidance of the ring, what they finally found were ferocious beasts or broken limbs. This buried a layer of gloom in the hearts of the few survivors who had just survived the space turbulence. Out of a team of dozens of people, only 6 of them were left in the end. Xiao Yunyi looked up at the getting dark sky, looked at the girl with 2 ponytails in the team and said, "Jing Jing, use your ability to sense a safe place nearby. Let's rest for the night and leave here as soon as possible tomorrow." At night, several simple tents were stationed on the banks of the streams in the jungle and mountain streams. A faint fire ignited in the tent, not much more powerful than the fireflies. "Sister Fanyan, why did you stop me today?" The girl with twin ponytails spoke quietly in the tent, her eyes shining brightly. "That Chiumu is Guyet, Overlord Guyet." After the catastrophe in God's domain ended, many surviving players returned to the real world. The experiences in the divine world left them with profound memories that they will never forget. Talented heroes from various major bases compete in another dimensional world, and countless talented and powerful people stand out among them. And if we want to talk about the most legendary figure in the world of God's domain, the one who has left an indelible impression in the hearts of all players is none other than the mysterious and powerful Guyet. One person single-handedly challenged 70,000 players in the badging cave, and finally killed all the players in the server. No one dared to do it. It was horrifying. After that battle, the player codenamed Guyet was even dubbed the Overlord. Overlord Lonely Knight? After the catastrophe in God's domain ended, countless players and human bases tried to find the true identity of Overlord Guyet in reality. But the latter seems to have disappeared from the world and there is no news about it. Then came the unparalleled rumors that the Zilan base was destroyed by the Lord of Yanjai and his army led by the Lord of Yanjai, and the Don allied forces encircled and suppressed the Yanjai dynasty, which shocked the human race. And the search for Overlord Guy was over. It seems as if Guy, the overlord of the Mega-God realm, has really been submerged in the dust of history along with Zilan base. I didn't expect that Ba Wang Guy was actually a handsome scientific research expert in reality. The eyes of the girl with twin tails shone with admiration, and the extremely domineering and powerful figure on the plain simply pierced her heart. "By the way, Sister Fanyan, why don't you recognize Brother Chiu? I remember how you had a good relationship with him in God's domain." The girl looked at Ye Fanyan with some confusion, with a flame named Bagua burning in her eyes. Tianlai Novel Network. Ye Fanyan, who was lying sideways next to the girl, gently shook his head and asked, "Jing Jing, did you find anything wrong when you investigated him today?" The girl is the only player in the team who has the ability to perceive shapes. The specific ability is to sense the energy fluctuations of surrounding creatures within a certain range to determine the opponent's strength level. Relying on the girl's ability, their team avoided many dangerous situations. Jing Jing pouted her mouth and thought for a while. It seems that Brother Chi really doesn't sense any power fluctuations. He looks just like an ordinary person. Ordinary people. Ye Fanyan frowned slightly, she couldn't help but think of Mu Chiu's mention in the secret forest that his real identity was just an ordinary person. The girl Jing Jing beside her saw Yefanyan lost in thought, shook the latter's arm and said coquettishly, "Tell me, I don't believe that nothing happened when you two were alone in the secret realm for so long." But Yefanyan suddenly turned his head and looked at the girl, saying seriously, "Jing Jing, you must not tell others about Chiu Mu's identity in the god's domain." Looking at Yefanyan's unprecedented solemn expression, the girl Jing Jing also woke up and opened her mouth slightly. "Chiu Mu has made too many enemies in the god's domain world. If those people know his real identity, they will definitely target him by all means. Yes, how many players did Overlord Guya kill in the god's domain world? Some of the players killed by Mu Chiu are the seeds of genius cultivated by the human base, the hope of the base's future. If these high-ranking officials knew the true identity of Overlord Guya, what would be the consequences?" Even if Jing Jing was a fangirl, she understood the importance of the matter and nodded heavily. "Sister Fanyan, I will definitely keep it a secret." After telling Jing Jing about this, Yefanyan's expression relaxed. She did not expect to meet Mu Chiu here. The words the latter had said to him were still vivid in her mind. Gently stroking the dark green jade pendant on her neck that was shining with a dim light, she lowered her eyes and stared. Through the surface of the jade pendant, it seemed that there was a holy sword shining with golden light circling in the void. Destiny. Sign in at the end of the world, start by devouring the flame demon lord. Author, MOCNU. Chapter 415. Quick, fight quickly, those monsters are about to catch up. In the deep and quiet forest, a painful roar of a ferocious beast could be heard. I saw a huge monster like a wolf and a tiger roaring loudly, and a ferocious blood hole appeared in its abdomen. Immediately, the monster wailed and fell to the ground, a large amount of blood gushed out from its belly, and it made no sound. And not far from where this ferocious beast fell to the ground, several huge corpses that also exuded extraordinary aura lay lying on the ground. A team of 7 awakened ones appeared not far away, holding long swords or short spears, their chests rising and falling slightly. There were somewhat chaotic energy fluctuations exuding around them, and it was obvious that they had just experienced a fierce battle that was not easy. Everyone looked around at the fallen monster corpses, and the strong smell of blood quickly attracted some beings from the depths of the jungle. The shaking sound of the earth indicates that the monsters located deep in the jungle are running towards their direction at high speed. "Let's go." Jing Jing, a girl with twin ponytails, took out a disc-shaped pointer and closed her eyes, as if she was sensing something. "Over there." Immediately afterwards, the little girl pointed to a certain direction along the lower edge of the stream. Seeing this, several people rushed towards the direction pointed by Jing Jing without saying a word. But what no one expected was that shortly after a few people left, the corpses on the ground began to wither very quickly, and countless blood was drawn out of their bodies by an unknown force. Threads of blood disappeared out of thin air, and all the corpses on the ground turned into mummies. Led by Jing Jing, the team fled at high speed along the direction of the mountain stream. Mu Chiu, who was caught in the crowd, saw this scene and was amazed. This little girl's ability seems to be to sense the strength of supernatural energy, and the whole team is walking along the way based on the little girl's sense, seeking good fortune and avoiding misfortune. The mutated beasts that everyone encountered along the way were basically among the weakest batch in the jungle. During the whole process, Mu Chiu was firmly protected by everyone, as if he was really just a frail scientific research expert. During this period, Yefanyan had been secretly observing Mu Chiu, but even when the vicious beast jumped in front of him, the latter did not make the slightest move. Several people did not dare to return along the original path, so they went straight down the stream. In just half a day, everyone passed through the deep forest and stood on a towering hillside. What came into view was a town building that had long been occupied by zombies and turned into ruins. Everyone looked at each other and rushed towards the town down the hillside without much hesitation. Compared with the vast and secluded forest, which is full of dangers and hides countless ferocious beasts, the ruined town is obviously safer now. After a while, the sun was blazing in the sky, and its scorching breath was roasting all living things below. Everyone finally arrived at the town at the foot of the hillside. The words Guanja Town, Nangzinzou are clearly engraved on a plaque above the dilapidated gatehouse. Nangzinzou. Xiao Yunyi took the compass from his companion and said solemnly. No wonder that dense forest is so lush. This is the border area between the Western Territory and the Southern Territory. I didn't expect that we were carried so far away by the space turbulence. This place is thousands of kilometers away from our base. Several other people also looked at each other with panic in their eyes. The orc took out a map from his backpack, spread it out and marked out the boundaries of where the people were currently. This map was obviously re-edited after the end of the world, and you can even see the names of some existing human bases on it. Their Yungziao city is located in the Baiziao territory to the north of the map, but the audience is now located south of the west of the map. If you want to return the same way, you not only have to cross the vast mountains behind you, but also have to trek hundreds of kilometers. Not to mention that the only place they had to go back was Wangcheng, and they were lucky enough to escape. They were already frightened by the experience of Wangcheng and vowed never to set foot in Wangcheng again. After a short discussion, everyone felt that traveling thousands of miles back to the base was nothing more than a dream. So, there aren't many options left for us. Xiao Yunyi pointed to the human base closest to them in the Southern Territory on the map. My suggestion is to rush to the nearest human base to seek rescue. Qingyang Base once commissioned Zilan Base to build a space passage directly to Baiziao territory. Speaking of Zilan Base, Xiao Yunyi looked at Mu Qiu subconsciously. The leaders of the Qingyang Base have been friends with my Xiao family for generations, and they have interacted with each other even after the end of the world. I think they will not refuse our request. After a little research, everyone felt that Xiao Yunyi's proposal was feasible. After all, it seemed that there was no better way. Xiao Yunyi looked at Mu Qiu again. Mr. Qiu, what do you think? Mu Qiu looked at the location marked on the map. Qingyang Base happened to be located at the southern border, and nodded with a chuckle. Since someone can lead the way and help you hide your tracks, why not? Seeing that Mu Qiu agreed, Xiao Yunyi secretly breathed a sigh of relief. He really wanted to bring this scientific research expert from Zilan Base back to the base to make up for his own leadership mistakes. Just then, a gurgling stomach sound suddenly came from the side. Everyone looked in the direction of the sound, and saw a girl with twin ponytails named Jingjing covering her stomach embarrassedly. After a long journey through the dark forest, they had not eaten for a whole day. Looking at everyone's dress, Wangcheng Base fled in a hurry, shuttled through the dangerous space turbulence, and fought all the way in the dark forest. They were all dusty and covered with scars. The most exaggerated one was Mu Qiu, whose whole body was stained with blood. Wearing a bloody shirt, the bloody smell from his clothes alone would probably attract the attention of many zombies. Everyone unanimously decided to enter the town in front of them to make some adjustments and search for sufficient supplies before setting off. The sun was shining in the sky, and the entire town that had turned into ruins seemed extremely quiet. The zombies here were hiding in the dark places of the city to maintain the few energies in their bodies. As everyone entered, some beings hidden deep in the town also smelled the breath of living people at the first time, and opened their red pupils in the dark. Walking on the empty roadside, you can still see a few skeletons that have turned into white. This town is located in a remote area, and it is backed by mountains. The zombie monsters trapped in it simply do not have enough blood food to replenish the energy lost in their bodies. They began to kill each other irrationally, desperately eating each other's flesh and blood to replenish themselves. This also caused the number of zombies in the entire town to decrease. The skeletons scattered on the roadside are not the remains of human survivors, but the skeletons of zombies that have been eaten. The mottled bloodstains, scrapped vehicles, and broken and collapsed storefronts on both sides of the street are still clearly visible, as if they all indicate what kind of harsh war this place has experienced before. After the apocalypse, the humans who survived in this town also tried to struggle, but in the face of the huge number of zombies, the struggle of humans was futile. Warm TI. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. Sign in at the end of the world, start by devouring the flame demon lord. Author, MaleProtagonist. Chapter 416. The group swaggered through the town and finally came to the largest department store in the center of the town. During the period, they naturally encountered some hungry zombie monsters, but they were no match for this group of awakened people with an average of a level per person. You know, their original mission on this trip was to explore the dangerous city ruins. After cleaning up the zombies hidden in the mall, a group of 7 people including Miu went into the mall to search for resources. The people who came out of the deep mountains and old forests were covered in dust and looked like savages. They couldn't wait to change into suitable clothes when they entered the mall. And Miu also entered a men's counter at the reminder of others. Looking at the slender figure covered in blood in the mirror, there was no sense of disobedience at all, and Miu couldn't help but feel a little emotional. I don't know when it started, blood and killing became indispensable things around him. Looking at the dazzling array of gorgeous fashions, Miu just picked a white shirt and took a black windbreaker with a full sense of texture from the shelf. After changing into a light white shirt and a black windbreaker, Miu turned around and walked out of the counter. As soon as he walked out of the store, a familiar figure came towards him. Yefenyan also happened to walk out of the fashion counter on the other side, with delicate features and fair skin. It seemed that in order to facilitate the battle, she deliberately changed into a pair of denim shorts, showing her slender and tender long legs. Her long hair was tied up in a high ponytail behind her head, and the loose top could not hide her hot figure. But Yefenyan also had an ethereal fairy spirit. The modern dress combined with her fairy-like pure appearance brought people an extreme contrast temptation. When their eyes met, Yefenyan also saw Miu's dress at the same time. She was still wearing a black windbreaker and a white shirt inside, and the familiar face was even closer. In a trance, Yefenyan seemed to see the scene of the overlord named Guye standing in front of him, standing alone against thousands of troops. Unconsciously turning his head, for some reason, Yefenyan didn't want to be recognized by Miu. Seeing Yefenyan's appearance, Miu raised the corner of his mouth and smiled meaningfully. "This dress suits you very well." A look of surprise flashed in Yefenyan's eyes. This tone, could it be that he was recognized? At this moment, several companions in the team in the distance also changed their clothes and rushed over. Unlike others, Xiao Yunyi changed into a neat suit, which matched his handsome face, like a nobleman attending a banquet. The moment he saw Yefenyan, Xiao Yunyi's eyes lit up, and he came forward with a charming smile on his face. "Fanyan, this dress suits you very well." The same words, but Xiao Yunyi directly made Yefenyan sober up instantly. Yefenyan smiled reluctantly, obviously not wanting to have a deeper conversation. "Brother Xiao, what are you talking about? Our sister Fanyan is naturally beautiful, so she must look good in anything she wears." A gorgeously dressed woman laughed. But Miu keenly noticed that the gorgeously dressed woman looked at Yefenyan with a hint of jealousy in her eyes. The woman was wearing a hot short skirt and a bra on her upper body, her full breasts were about to burst out, and her wheat-colored skin was exposed, revealing a bit of temptation in her sexiness. The man wearing round-framed glasses not far away glanced at the sexy woman unconsciously and swallowed his saliva subconsciously. If Miu remembered correctly, the sexy woman was called Xiao Man by everyone, and the seemingly ordinary man wearing round-framed glasses was called Zhuangjiang. The sturdy orc who had talked to Mu Qiu before and had a good chat was called Yao Yuan. Unlike the others, Yao Yuan only changed into a pair of shorts, with his upper body bare-chested, and his knotted muscles bulged and firm. After changing clothes, several people searched in the department store and actually found some unopened canned food and unexpired food. After a bloody battle in the jungle, the hungry people could not bear the hunger in their hearts and feasted on the food in front of them. Brother Qiu. Mu Qiu was holding a can in his hand, but heard a charming voice from behind. A girl with twin ponytails came towards Mu Qiu, and she seemed to be holding something in her hand. Mu Qiu vaguely remembered that this girl named Jingjing had been following Yefanyan since the God Realm world. Jingjing looked at the handsome man in front of her, who looked like a weak scholar, but there seemed to be stars in her eyes. She knew that the real identity behind the man in front of her was the Overlord Guya, who had subdued the 70,000 coalition forces in the Overlord cave with his own strength. The girl came to Mu Qiu in a hop and skip, holding up the item in her hand like a little fangirl. Brother Qiu, this is what Sister Fanyan asked me to give you. Mu Qiu looked down and saw that the girl was holding a deep red prajna mask in her hand. With two horns on the head, a hideous face, and pointed ears, she looked like a demon from hell. Although the appearance looks intimidating, the mask is made of alloy casting, which should be just an ordinary item found in a department store. Sister Fanyan said that Brother Qiu is now wanted by the people of the Eternal Night Dynasty. He can hide his identity by wearing a mask. Jingjing's words were a double entendre, and there was nothing wrong with them for those who didn't know the truth. Xiao Yunyi naturally heard Jingjing's words, and it seemed to make sense after a second thought. But a strange look flashed across his eyes when he looked at Mu Qiu. Yefanyan hadn't given him any gifts yet, but this kid got there first. In order to make up for his mistake, Xiao Yunyi had to temporarily hide his unhappiness. Taking the mask from the girl, Mu Qiu understood and turned to look at Yefanyan's figure in the distance. The latter was also paying attention to Mu Qiu at this moment, but turned his head away the moment Mu Qiu's eyes were cast, and a smile flashed across her pretty face. Then thank Miss Fanyan for me. Mu Qiu tried to wear this hideous prajna mask, and a smile appeared under the crimson mask. Sign in at the end of the world, start by devouring the flame demon lord. Author, MOCNU. Chapter 417. Late at night, Jingjing was awakened from her sleep by the urge to urinate. She opened her eyes and saw darkness in front of her. She looked at Yefanyan, who was sleeping on her side. She curled her lips and finally got up and walked quietly towards the abandoned public toilet on the first floor of the mall. She went straight to the first floor. After a while, the girl in pajamas walked out of the public toilet with a relaxed look. She rubbed her sleepy eyes and was about to go back to rest. But suddenly, a very erratic energy breath came from a very far distance. The girl opened her eyes suddenly and looked at the quiet night sky through the glass door. She was intuitive and sensitive in perceiving energy and immediately noticed something was wrong. After waking up, the girl planned to turn around and tell her companions about this matter to be alert. But what she didn't expect was that this strange breath was fleeting, and it seemed as if it had never appeared when she sensed it again. Did she sleep confused? Jingjing looked strange, and looked at the calm night sky in the distance. Driven by curiosity, the girl gently opened the door of the mall and quietly explored the place she sensed in the distance. The zombies in this small town are generally low level. If she really encounters any danger, her A level is enough to deal with it. Walking through the streets, the girl walked through two streets in the dark ruins. The strange thing is that night is obviously the most active time for zombie beasts. But the girl didn't encounter a zombie along the way, and even what she sensed with her supernatural power was nothingness. Until she arrived near the sensing point, the faint breath reappeared, and then disappeared again in a flash. A faint red glow could be seen in the distant sky. The girl tiptoed past a building, but the scene in front of her made her gasp. A large area of raging fire burned in the center of the city, and the bodies of countless zombie monsters fell to the ground. The corpse shrank, and the blood in the sky gathered into bloodlines and flowed into the air. Several adjacent buildings collapsed one after another, but the strange thing was that the buildings turned into ashes in the flames at the moment of collapse, without making any sound. A huge zombie let out a low roar, and a bloodline passed in front of it, and the huge body was instantly split into two. As the body fell, countless bloodlines gathered behind, and the girl also saw the existence standing in the middle of countless piles of corpses. A black robe covered her slender figure, but the robe was not stained with blood despite the wanton killing. The karmic fire burned, and this slender figure seemed like an emperor in the fire, with blazing flames burning and jumping around his body. And the next moment, this figure slowly turned around and looked at the girl hiding in the dark corner. Holding a strange long sword flowing with blood, wearing a hideous prajna mask on his head. Looking at this familiar mask, the girl's eyes twitched, and her eyes were filled with deep shock and fear. At this moment, the figure suddenly raised his hand to take off the mask, revealing a handsome man's face. His eyes narrowed slightly, with a gentle smile on his face, but the flames and boiling corpses around him kept reminding him how dangerous and brutal the man in front of him was. "It's time to sleep now, little girl." Gently took off the prajna mask, and under the hideous mask was a handsome and familiar face. The next second, the man's pupils suddenly turned blood red, and the Megatama rotated like a blood moon. Looking into the blood-red eyes, the girl's panicked face suddenly calmed down. Her eyes were empty, and her soul seemed to be deeply trapped in it. Her petite body softened and fell to the ground. Then, the boundless red flames burned the shriveled bodies of countless zombie monsters around, leaving no trace. Under the blazing fire, Miuchiu's calm face was reflected. Late at night, a swirling black gas swept through the mall like a demonic wind. Until entering a store on the third floor of the mall. The surrounding black gas swept across the ground, and a sleeping girl was gently placed on the ground. Then the black gas disappeared out of thin air, as if it had never appeared. Not far from the girl, a woman with a high ponytail was also lying flat on the floor. At the moment the black gas appeared, the green jade pendant on the woman's neck flickered, and then dimmed at the moment the black gas disappeared. "Jing jing, jing jing, wake up, it's time to get up." The girl's gentle voice echoed in her ears, and the girl slowly opened her eyes. "Wake up, girl, we should set off." Yafanyan scratched the girl's upturned nose and smiled softly. "Sister Fanyan." The girl rubbed her sleepy eyes, looking like she hadn't woken up yet. Sitting up, Jing Jing suddenly felt a sharp pain in her mind, vaguely remembering that something important seemed to have happened last night. She carefully recalled everything that happened last night, but her memory stayed at the moment when she was awakened by the urge to urinate. The girl shook her head in confusion. Could it be that she had been dreaming too much? Tianlai Novel Network. Soon, the people who had rested in the shops of the mall for a night also gathered in the hall of the mall. The early morning sunlight shone into the venue through the glass, and the few people who had rested were ready to set off at any time. The only difference from yesterday is that Miuchiu is wearing a black windbreaker today, but a crimson prajna mask on his head. While covering his face, it adds a bit of mystery to it. Coupled with the black windbreaker on his body, an invisible sharp temperament emanates. At first glance, it seems that Miuchiu is the leader of this team. When Jing Jing saw Miuchiu's familiar figure, her brain was like an electric shock in an instant, and it seemed that some pictures flashed, but it was gone in a flash. Miuchiu naturally saw the little girl's struggle, and the corners of her mouth under the mask rose. Yafanyan was silently paying attention to Miuchiu, who was more and more similar to the figure deep in her memory. If we want to cross a distance of 100 kilometers, we still need to find some means of transportation in the town. After a simple search yesterday, everyone had almost figured out the geographical layout of the entire town. After many years, most of the mechanized vehicles in the town have been scrapped. If they want to drive the vehicles away, they still need to perform some manual modifications. Just like that, everyone rushed to the largest auto repair shop in this border town. Sign in at the end of the world, start by devouring the flame demon lord. Author, MOCNU. Chapter 418. Night is the time when zombie beasts awaken and look for food. These bloodthirsty monsters are most active during this period. This is one of the reasons why many awakened people who explore the ruins are very reluctant to travel at night. In contrast, the activities of zombies during the day are slower, and they need to accumulate the little energy in their bodies. But what puzzled the team members was that they chose to go out in the daytime when the sun was shining, but there were very few zombies on the streets. The whole town seemed to have turned into an empty city. Compared with what they found yesterday, there were many fewer zombies in the town today. What's going on? Several people also felt the quiet atmosphere in the town and acted more cautiously. In contrast, Mu-Chiu, who stood in the middle of the crowd and was wearing the Prajna mask, was extremely calm. All the way was peaceful, and they didn't even encounter a few zombies. They went all the way west to the largest auto repair shop in the town. However, as soon as they entered the factory gate, the sensitive people smelled the faint smell of blood and rot in the air. The twin-tailed girl Jing Jing shook her head gently, indicating that she did not sense the breath of heresy here. Everyone was relieved and walked slowly towards the inside of the factory. There were some scrapped vehicles on both sides, the surface of the car shell had been weathered under the baking of the sun, and there were mottled blood stains on it. However, when entering the factory and looking at the scene in front of them, the people who had been prepared in their hearts could not help but start to vomit. What is this? I saw dozens of rotten and smelly corpses lying on the cement ground in the distance. The blood on the ground had dried up, and the faces of these corpses were festering, the bodies were broken, and the limbs were scattered everywhere. The orc named Yao Yuan in the team stepped forward to investigate and came to an astonishing conclusion. These corpses were all human beings before they died, and the time of death should not exceed 2 weeks. As soon as this was said, everyone present was shocked. Are they survivors of this town? They did not expect that there would be survivors in this town. I didn't expect these survivors to die in such a strange way. Although there are signs of bites on their bodies, there are no signs of large-scale eating of the flesh and blood. If it was really the zombies from the outside world, they would have been hungry for a long time and left only white skeletons. Everyone was a little confused. If it wasn't the bloodthirsty zombie beasts, then what happened here that caused these survivors who had lived in the apocalypse for several years to die strangely half a month ago? After an in-depth inspection, the orc came to an astonishing conclusion. Some of them died of fatal injuries from being bitten, while others were cut off by some sharp weapon and died of excessive blood loss. I suspect their deaths were caused by humans. What's even more strange is that most of the bodies here are missing a joint on their bodies, some have their heads cut off, and some have lost their limbs. Just then, the scream of the charming woman named Xiao Man suddenly came from a distance. The sound came from deep in the factory, and everyone hurried to follow the sound. The hotly dressed woman was stunned. On the wall in front of her, a blood-colored pupil pattern was drawn with blood, which made people feel fear from the bottom of their hearts. Eternal Night Dynasty. Several people recognized what the blood-colored pupil pattern meant at a glance, and their expressions immediately became terrified. Why did the Eternal Night Dynasty appear here? Were all the corpses outside killed by the Eternal Night Evil clan? Damn, has the Eternal Night Dynasty extended its tentacles here? Everyone's performance was different, but they all had deep fear on their faces. There is no doubt that after the Battle of Dawn, the strength of the Eternal Night Dynasty has been thoroughly rooted in the hearts of the people. The major human forces even began to instruct their subordinates not to initiate direct conflicts with it unless necessary. but the unique symbol of the Eternal Night Dynasty appeared here, which cast a layer of haze on the hearts of the already exhausted people. When everyone was panicking, only Mu Qiu, who was wearing a prajna mask, remained calm. He first walked to the wall and touched the dried blood on his pupils. He was sure that everything here had nothing to do with the Eternal Night Dynasty. And if Mu Qiu took action, what would be left here would not be just a pile of broken bodies. As for the culprit who caused all this, Mu Qiu already had a guess in his mind. Mu Qiu had just checked the pile of broken bodies in the factory and found that the way these people died was very similar to the massacre he had seen in Wangcheng Base. Either people killed each other, or some kind of sharp weapon easily cut off the vital parts of their limbs, and they were turned into human pigs and bled to death. In the dark, Mu Qiu seemed to see a bloody figure with countless silk threads, laughing crazily at him. The other party also came to the southern border, and wherever they passed, there was a massacre, and no one survived. What's more sinister is that after each killing, the other party would leave a mark related to the Eternal Night Dynasty. It seems that it was designed specifically to frame the Eternal Night Dynasty and turn it into an extremely evil public enemy of humanity with a murderous nature in the minds of the people. Mu Qiu never denied that the Eternal Night clan was evil by nature and liked to kill, but he would not tolerate the other party's deliberate accusation. Since you have also come to southern Xinjiang, let's settle the account with the last time. The pupils under the mask flashed a blood-red light. The name of the Eternal Night Kingship was established by him with bloody killings. But at this moment, a dull sound suddenly came from the door deep in the factory. Everyone was shocked and had not yet recovered from the heavy news of the Eternal Night Dynasty. Boom! Immediately afterwards, there was another thunderous sound of hitting, as if there was something inside the steel door that was about to come out. Finally, accompanied by a thunderous boom sound, the monster hidden in the depths of the factory broke through the heavy iron door and appeared in front of everyone. It was a terrifying monster whose whole body was made up of various strange flesh. Zombie heads, human limbs, fangs and teeth of various beasts. This monster is like a huge meat mountain, with countless heads and claws. The expressions on those faces are all ferocious pupils, but they have completely lost their minds, exuding strong murderous intent and lingering resentment. What kind of monster is this? Everyone was frightened by the monster in front of them. There is no doubt that the missing limbs of the factory corpses all appeared on this monster. As if for some disgusting taste, someone artificially pieced together the body parts of these corpses to create such a horrifying monster. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. Sign in at the end of the world. Start by devouring the Flame Demon Lord. Author, Mo. Chapter 419. The hideous monster that rushed out of the factory warehouse shocked everyone's senses. Made up of the corpses of various creatures, the monster, which looked like a mountain of flesh, exuded a terrifying aura that made people's hearts palpitate. Dozens of pupils full of resentment stared at the people present, as if telling the misery and unwillingness before death. At the moment when this flesh monster appeared, everyone immediately felt a chaotic energy fluctuation. Is this an S-level monster? Xiao Yunyi looked at the several-meter-high tumor monster in front of him in astonishment, and his heart skipped a beat. In such a remote town, how could such a powerful monster of this level be bred? However, the next moment, the tumor monster's head, which was all over its body, opened its mouth and suddenly let out a sad wail. It hated all living creatures with intact bodies. With a resentful look in its eyes, it completely lost its rationality and launched a fierce attack on the team members. Dozens of long arms stretched out of thin air from the huge tumor, with mottled corpse spots on the skinny skin, and some even had the purple claws of zombies. The strong corpse stench made everyone nauseous, but dozens of bloody arms were already in front of them. With no way to avoid it, everyone could only bite the bullet and fight fiercely with it. The orc named Yao Yuan roared, and his body suddenly expanded several times, his hair grew luxuriantly, and a pair of horns grew on his head, and he turned into a bull-headed beast in an instant. And the hot Zioman pulled out the long whip from his waist, and the several-meter-long whip actually grew barbs. As if given life, it bit and killed the tumor monster like a grey python. Yefanyan's eyes flickered, his body was agile, and he waved the long sword in his hand, and a large gust of wind swept through the entire factory. The remains of many cars parked in the factory warehouse were destroyed by the sweeping gust of wind in an instant. The surrounding walls even showed cracks under the strong wind pressure. Tianlai novel network. The tumor monster made up of many remains was instantly swept by the fierce storm, and the invisible blade composed of the hurricane cut its body into several pieces. However, strangely, the moment the body was cut by the wind blade, the heads embedded in the body began to wail miserably. As if the resentment was condensed and not dispersed, blood-colored threads appeared in the cut body. The next moment, the blood threads were entangled at the wound, and the huge body of the tumor monster was pieced back together again. Instead, the resentment emitted by this disgusting tumor monster was even greater. It seemed that every torture of its body would arouse the deep resentment of the soul trapped in the body. What kind of monster is this? Xiao Yunyi, who was holding a steel knife and entangled with the tentacles of the tumor monster, had a strange look on his face. As the leader of the team, Xiao Yunyi, an S-level awakener, was not good at fighting. Although his ability can enhance the body's abilities to a certain extent, compared to other S-level beings, this ability is quite useless. After cutting off several arms of the tumor monster, Xiao Yunyi's handsome face has already emerged with a ferocious look. He glanced at Yefanyan, who was soaring into the air in the distance, surrounded by a hurricane, like a fairy descending to the earth. Xiao Yunyi gritted his teeth. He didn't believe that he couldn't beat an A-level awakener, not to mention that the other party was his current goal. With a loud shout, Xiao Yunyi raised the steel knife and rushed towards the tumor monster. How could it be? I can't capture the soul of this monster. On the other side, the thin man with round frame glasses and ordinary face looked at the huge body of the tumor monster with a look of astonishment. His ability is dedicated to detecting souls and capturing and refining them, and soul attacks are even more difficult to defend against. But facing this huge tumor monster, he had no chance to attack at all. He actually saw hundreds of miserable souls with resentment around the tumor monster. What did these souls experience in their lives? The whole team was composed of A-level awakeners, and even Xiao Yunyi was a powerful S-level awakener. They were the backbone of all major human forces. But the giant monster in front of him, which was made up of countless flesh and blood, was extremely difficult to deal with. The tentacles and flesh were chopped and cut, but they were reshaped like mud and sand, which was extremely weird. As the flesh and blood body was constantly reshaped in the annihilation, the resentment accumulated in the huge tumor monster reached its peak. Accompanied by screams, the deep resentment that was about to turn into substance surged out, which was frightening. The next moment, the poisonous long whip controlled by the charming woman Zioman was directly torn by the claws of the zombies. And her whole body was pinched by another arm, her eyes rolled back and she couldn't breathe. The bull-headed warrior Yao Yuan was even more miserable, with large pieces of skin and flesh torn off by the fangs of the beast on the tumor, looking bloody. The only one who was still causing damage to the monster was Yefanyan, who was standing in the air and pulling the gust of wind. The body of the flesh monster was constantly reshaped under the annihilation of the hurricane, and the strong resentment began to vent to all the creatures around it. The next moment, the tumor monster roared, and its huge body rushed directly towards the people in the distance. The first to bear the brunt was the masked man Mu Qiu, who had been standing there and seemed to be scared silly. Dozens of pairs of ferocious claws-like tentacles clawed at Mu Qiu's thin body. Each head was filled with malice, as if it was about to tear the creature in front of it into pieces in the next second. Careful! Yefanyan, who was in the air, frowned when he saw this, and he no longer had too much to worry about at this moment. The strong wind swept across a large area in front of me, and finally converged into a huge white spiritual bird. A hurricane surrounded the spirit bird, and the cries of birds echoed in the air. The majestic hurricane accompanied the white spirit bird as it struck in the direction of the sarcoma monster. Looking at the huge sarcoma coming towards him, Mewtwo, who was wearing a mask, remained unmoved. The hurricane surged behind him, and the white spiritual bird swept by the strong wind also broke through the air and struck. The corners of his mouth under the mask were slightly raised. When Yefanyan triggered the hurricane just now, he had already sensed Yefanyan's hidden true strength. The latter is also an S-level awakener. In a blind spot that no one had seen, Mewtwo's fingers moved slightly under her robe. The next moment, the body of the sarcoma monster that had been pestering everyone for a long time without being destroyed actually swelled and exploded out of thin air. At this moment, the white spiritual bird condensed by Yefanyan happened to hit the body of the sarcoma monster. In an instant, the violent wind swept through the body of the white spiritual bird, and majestic energy fluctuations instantly exploded throughout the factory. Sign in at the end of the world, start by devouring the flame demon lord. Author, MaleProtagonist. Chapter 420. Boom. A violent explosion echoed in the quiet suburbs of the town. I saw an automobile factory on the outskirts of town explode instantly. The sweeping gusts of wind mixed with countless pools of disgusting flesh and blood raged in the sky. After a while, the hurricane that was almost turning into a tornado finally stopped. The sarcoma monster contained within it has long since disappeared, turning into rotten pieces of bloody flesh and falling to the ground, like a rain of blood. The people who escaped from the factory couldn't help but look horrified when they saw the explosion in the warehouse. Sister Fanyan is so amazing. The girl with twin ponytails on the side had her eyes lit up with stars, and she hugged Yefanyan beside her excitedly. Yefanyan forced a smile, but felt a little strange in her heart. She didn't even use much of her true strength in the attack just now, and the tough sarcoma monster was easily killed by her. It was as if the sarcoma monster had some abnormality in its body before it was attacked by the wind bird, and she was just responsible for finishing it. After thinking for a moment, Yefanyan shook his head again. Maybe she's overthinking it. What kind of ability is needed to quietly kill that huge sarcoma monster with one blow? Fanyan, thanks to you this time, otherwise that monster would be really difficult to deal with. Xiao Yunyi's figure came from a distance, looking embarrassed. As the only S-level awakener in the team, his role is actually not as good as that of A-level Yefanyan. Recalling the sarcoma monster whose whole body was made of various kinds of flesh and blood, everyone still felt lingering fear. Zhuangqiang, who was wearing a pair of round glasses, walked to a blurry piece of meat. What is astonishing is that there are bloodlines as thin as hair extending from the inside of these pieces of meat. These bloodlines seem to be crawling with life, as if they are pulling the flesh and blood to reunite again. Zhuangqiang said in surprise, that flesh and blood monster was pieced together by these blood threads. What are the origins of these blood-red threads? Everyone looked at the bloody threads crawling on the ground, keeping secret for fear of avoiding them. At this moment, Mewtwo, who was wearing a black robe, made a move that no one expected. He walked directly to the corpse and grabbed a squirming thread from the flesh without fear, as if he was exploring something. But the thread withered the moment it left the flesh and blood. This made everyone feel a little ashamed while being shocked. Is this the mad scientist from Zilan base? Under the mask, Mewtwo ignored the gazes of others. He could feel a special energy wave from the bloodline. Someone slaughtered all the survivors in the entire town, and then used blood threads to sew the limbs and flesh of the zombie beasts together. These tortured and resentful souls are also bound by blood threads, suppressed in the patchwork monster body and unable to escape. In Mewtwo's view, this huge sarcoma monster was more like a failed work created by that person. The auto repair shop has been completely destroyed in the battle with the sarcoma monster. Fortunately, there are still some abandoned vehicles in another warehouse. Xiao Yuan seemed to be quite proficient in modifying vehicles, so he volunteered and dragged several scrapped vehicles into the modification workshop. After a while, there was a harsh sound of welding in the workshop. Only then did Mu Qiu realize that Yao Yuan's specialty before the end of the world was vehicle modification. The remaining people in the team took this opportunity to recover the consumption in the previous battle. Ye Fanyan sat on the steps in front of the factory gate, leaning her chin and looking at the distant sky, wondering what she was thinking. "What are you thinking about?" At this moment, a gentle voice came from my ears. Hearing the familiar voice, Ye Fanyan turned his head hurriedly. I saw a figure wearing a black windbreaker walking slowly from behind. Mu Qiu took off his mask, revealing a smile as bright as spring breeze. Seeing this familiar face so close, Ye Fanyan opened his mouth, but he didn't know how to speak. "I haven't thanked you enough for your rescue just now." Mu Qiu narrowed her eyes and smiled, and coupled with her delicate face, she looked like a cheerful young man. "No, it's okay." Turning his head unconsciously, Ye Fanyan's tone was a little unnatural. Ye Fanyan, who didn't look down on S-class monsters at all, actually changed his appearance completely when facing Mu Qiu. Seeing Ye Fanyan like this, Mu Qiu couldn't help but become playful and chuckled. "Speaking of which, I also have a friend named Fanyan. You two are very similar in personality and appearance. When we first met, I almost recognized you as her." Hearing Mu Qiu mentioning herself, Ye Fanyan subconsciously covered the long and narrow scar on her face, with a somewhat bitter smile on her face. "You probably made a mistake. It's rare to see girls with such ugly scars on their faces. Excessive anxiety about appearance is Versailles." Mu Qiu chuckled and shook her head. "There are many beautiful girls in this world, but those who are as beautiful as you and have extraordinary fighting power are rare in the world." Knowing that Mu Qiu was trying to comfort herself, such ordinary words made Ye Fanyan feel warm in her heart. Standing up, the bitter smile on Ye Fanyan's face faded, and she smiled. "I'll take it as you are comforting me. Then you must do your best to protect me," Mu Qiu said with a teasing smile. Hearing this, Ye Fanyan couldn't help but think of the domineering figure standing in front of him in the world of God's domain, blocking the 70,000 troops. I still owe this person a life. Coming to reality, even if Mu Qiu is just an ordinary person with no power, Ye Fanyan will do his best to protect him. Ye Fanyan's eyes were particularly serious, and he looked at Mu Qiu and nodded. When their eyes met, Ye Fanyan turned his head away unnaturally. As if to divert attention, Ye Fanyan said to Mu Qiu, "If you have any ideas about that monster, you can discuss some ideas with Zhuangqiang. His ability specializes in the soul." Mu Qiu thought of the man with a pair of round-framed glasses and an unremarkable appearance. In the past few days, Mu Qiu could feel the other party's vague prying, and the look he gave him was a bit suspicious. Ye Fanyan's eyes flickered, and he whispered, "Don't underestimate Zhuangqiang, his ability is highly valued even in our base. He even entered the God's Realm trial before and competed with the geniuses of various bases." Mu Qiu realized that Ye Fanyan was reminding him in various ways. Zhuangqiang was also a player who had entered the God's Realm world, and it was very likely that he recognized his vest as Overlord Guyet.